Now, we're not going to let you get off that easy, Tony. Some people have a tale from the trading desk, and I was wondering if you could share one with us.
Yeah, I want to share a story from, this has got to be about 5 or 6 years ago. I used to be a very, very active futures trader. And at the time, I was trading just E-minis, which predominantly is what I was trading. And I had a pretty big following on Twitter because I was calling out my trades live and doing fairly well at it. And I had a very specific strategy that I think any futures trader or any big futures trader is probably familiar with, which was trading a strong reversal in a trend. And I had a very specific strategy and a very specific take profit that I would always add to my trades, and a very specific stop loss. And I always place those as one cancels the other. And I can even remember the stop loss that I had was 7 ticks to the downside, and my take profit was 9 ticks to the upside. So I think I was risking somewhere 7 ticks on S&P was just shy of $100, and my take profit was 9 ticks, just a little over $100 per contract. And I was doing a lot of trading, and I was calling out my trades, and I probably was one of those days where I just had a large number of winners. And if you trade S&P futures when things were moving, it wasn't uncommon to have 8, 9, 10 winning trades in a row if you had a good trending day. And one day, as I was on Twitter and I had a pretty big following, one of the biggest futures traders at the time on Twitter, commented on one of the trades that I made. I forget if I was long or short. I called out my entry level, I called out my stop loss, I called out my take profit level. And as the trade started to move against me, I decided to move my stops. And this was always something that, I was taught not to do. But at the time, I was looking at all my indicators and I said, you know what, I'm pretty sure of my directional trade, but I just think that the market might move a couple of ticks, towards my stop loss and then keep going in my direction. So I said, I'm moving my stops because of XYZ. And this guy who, was a pretty well-known futures trader called me out on this. And he said, and he was pretty blunt about it too, and he wasn't really nice about it. He was straight up saying, hey, that's really stupid for you to move your stops. and I really got into it with him on Twitter. And I said, look, I'm following your type of methodology. This is why I decided to move my stops. And I got so caught up in trying to prove to him why it was reasonable for me to move my stops that the trade went against me. I ended up having to put on more of that trade just to try to get back to break even. Next thing I know, as I'm fighting with this guy on Twitter, as I'm moving my stops and adding to my position, which I shouldn't have done, I ended up with my largest loser I've ever had in futures trading because I was so busy fighting with this guy and trying to prove to him that my stop losses should have been moved, that I ended up having the largest loss that I've ever had trading futures. And after that, I didn't trade for like 10 days because I was just so I was just like so mad at the fact that I did that, and I got caught up in trying to fight with this guy that I didn't stick to my rules. And that was really how I learned my lesson of placing stop losses and sticking to them, and not throwing bad money after good money. And this is something that I really try to teach in my education these days, is telling people how to manage their risk, because that's really by far the most important thing that you have to learn as a trader. It's not your strategy and not how to make money. It's how to manage risk, because that's how you survive as a trader.
That's a great story, Tony. I actually really appreciate that. As a guy that's on Twitter and takes a lot of flack, I know that the temptation sometimes to go and try to argue with people, or that you want to argue with people, and then also the difficulty in about, going the other way or admitting you were wrong. And sometimes the fact that you are public makes it more difficult to do something. And at the end of the day, you're right. You got to do what you have to do to manage your risk. And it doesn't matter. You shouldn't be on Twitter, arguing with anyone about your positions, because your positions should take priority above everything else.
Yeah. No, and it's interesting because that story resonates with me too. Because Tony, I ran a little futures day trading room as well for many years back in my day. And that was the same thing, right? Like anytime you break your rules, once you start like feeling the pressure to make something happen and you let up on your rules a little bit, the market loves to play that role of the great humiliator and separate you from your money. And so learning to manage that risk is so critical. And you know what? Sometimes you only learn that by doing. I mean, that's I think what makes a veteran trader. A veteran trader is you've touched the stove a couple of times and got burnt, and you know that following the rules is so important, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the most important lesson to learn is a humbleness in trading, right? That the markets will stay. The markets will stay irrational longer than you can stay solvent. And generally speaking, that statement is more so for long-term investing, but I can't help but think that, even for short-term traders, it is absolutely applicable that you need to be humble as far as trading, and you can't ever think that, oh, I have to be right. That is the kiss of death for any trader.
I agree. Well, thanks for sharing that with us, Tony. Make sure you guys stick around. We're going to get more of Tony in the aftermarket. After hours, sorry.